So this happened in the Los Angeles area recently. Now, one of the things that the Sunrise Movement really talks about a lot is environmental racism. Well, what does that mean? What is environmental racism? Well, environmental racism refers to, for instances, like the story we covered a couple days ago about that area of Detroit that is one of the most polluted places in the country, where it's hard to even walk outside without getting nauseous because of all the smog from oil refineries and toxic dumping and what they just had. I mean, just smokestacks, coal processing plants, just all these things that they had in this community. And why does that happen? Well, that happens because corporations know that it's cheaper for them to be in a poor neighborhood. It's cheaper for them to, do all their environmental infractions there. And the poor people have no recourse. What are they going to do about it? How are they going to get it out of their neighborhood? They can't afford to fight back. And the corporations know this. So they use poor neighborhoods for their dumping grounds, basically. What are you going to do about it? It's in your backyard and you can't stop it. Another, for instance, is when jets need to release their fuel. They do it in poor and underserved neighborhoods, especially in the Los Angeles area, because Los Angeles is a very densely populated place. And there are, for instances, where planes need to let go fuel. And they're doing that in rich neighborhoods. Well, they're doing that in poor neighborhoods. And here's a, for instance, where, a much more significant violation took place. A Delta plane injured 26 people by dumping fuel over an elementary school. Here's why planes dump fuel and how they usually try and avoid hitting people. So this Delta plane dumped jet fuel over an elementary school, causing minor injuries to children and adults on Tuesday. Now, here's why planes dump fuel. What happens is they will want to be at a certain weight when they take off and a certain weight when they land. Sometimes if they're not going to meet that weight for whatever reason, they need to dump fuel. And usually when they do it, they'll try to do it in a number of ways. First of all, they might fly around a little while to just burn more fuel. Otherwise, they might say, hey, where can we safely dump this fuel? So they are supposed to do so over unpopulated areas and at a high enough altitude for the fuel to vaporize before reaching the ground. It is not yet clear why the plane could not fly higher while dumping the fuel, but Delta said its plane had to return to LAX quickly because of an engine failure. Now, obviously, this situation is an extreme one. It's not like this is regular protocol. But what happened was they had a situation where they had to get back to LAX immediately. The plane was not sufficient to make the trip. They were flying lower than they should have been because of that. They were just trying to get back. They were at a lower altitude. They thought they were not going to have to dump any fuel. Like they thought, ground control asked them, do you need to dump fuel? The pilot said no. For whatever reason, as they were en route to LAX, that changed. Maybe they found that they, for whatever reason. I mean, I'm not a pilot, so I don't know why exactly that changed. But they told ground control, we do not need to dump fuel. And then that changed. I'm sure they didn't lie. I'm sure they weren't intentionally like, no, we don't need it. We're going to dump it on this school. I'm sure that's not what happened. I'm sure that at the time when they reported to ground control, they didn't think they needed to dump fuel. Later, they decided they did need to for whatever reason that was. And I guess they felt they didn't have time to, update that information. They just had to act. So obviously, this is an extreme case. But the reason this is nowhere, first of all, there were injuries. It landed on kids at a school and people at a school. Also, for other neighborhoods, this is commonplace. Not necessarily that they're flying at a low enough altitude that it injures people on the regular, but when you're constantly using poor, underserved neighborhoods to just dump your fuel, of course it affects the air quality. And when people say environmental racism and environmental discrimination, this is what they're referring to. Because typically it affects communities of color and poor neighborhoods. And of course, this is for instance, in the extreme, where because of an issue that was not handled properly. Now, maybe it was completely unpreventable. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know exactly. But based on the details we have, ground control, do you need to dump fuel? They said no. Then it turns out they did need to dump fuel, and they did it over a school. So And, it doesn't look like anyone was seriously hurt, so that's good. Um, but, it's kind of crazy that stuff like this has happened, that, when they have to dump fuel, obviously they should be high enough, where it's not going to injure people on the ground, but also it should be required that they're in an unpopulated area. They try for an unpopulated area, but really that's code for, well, we try for an unpopulated area, but if we don't get there, a poor neighborhood will do. All right. So that's something that is part of our world, unfortunately. All right.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your